So let's talk about health research, and we've hosted this gentleman here with us before, Professor Sam Kinyanjui, who is the head of training at the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Program. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, Eric.
How are you?
I'm very good.
You are?
Yeah.
You don't sound it, Bana. What song?
Niko Sawa.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
Now you've come there.
In fact, I was saying I think I might look for a job here. I've been here so often now.
You mean they haven't offered you a job yet?
So imagine.
No, actually, sorry, maybe I've it's because I overheard something. just ngoja utapigiwa simu.
Sawa.
But act surprised when they do. When they do, act surprised. Okay? Yeah, you just don't know. You didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mean you guys? Oh. Okay, we are going to talk about the steps in health research. You were here before, in the last time we were talking about the IDEAL program and what you and other researchers are doing in terms of just bringing together many people who would be interested in research and showing them that research is actually a good thing to be involved in, and particularly health research.
Yes.
But then we also don't understand this health research thing. What's it all about? Okay.
Yeah.
For example, the other day we had two scientists who are commencing some groundbreaking research on trying to understand the impact of climate change on our health systems. And we're calling it what? New risk,
yes.
Right? And we're like, okay, so where does it begin? Where does it end? At what point did you guys think about this? Then how do you go about it? And then how shall that research then become useful? All those steps, you'll take us through them today. City will take us through the steps of understanding a kingdom, the last absolute monarchy in Africa. It is.
Northern Africa have some fairly absolute monarchies.
Those ones are not last absolute monarchies.
Believe me, even when they call them an absolute monarchy, it's not entirely true, because the moment you have a parliament, you have a lower house, you have an upper house, you have a prime minister. No, you actually can't refer to it as absolute. Monarchs tend to have advisors and they stop there.
Bas.
Yes.
Now, what's the structure of government in this country that you are taking us to this week?
Well, they have they have a king.
Okay,
now everything, plenipotentiary, etc. Then they have a queen mother. Okay, the one whose name I'm not going to pronounce because
Queen mother is the mother of the king, or is the
mother of the king,
the leader of the queens?
Mother of the king.
Okay.
Yes.
How many queens do we have in that country?
How many queens do we have? Queen is one, chief.
There's one. There's one queen, and then there's the king's wives.
Yes,
those are different.
That's different. Yes.
Yeah.
There's senior, junior wife, and so forth. Okay. All right. You have a prime minister. I told his name is Russell Dlamini. You have a chief justice named Baki Mfalala. Okay. Then you have a legislature. You have a parliament. You have an upper house. You have a lower house called the House of Assembly. See? So that is their structure.
I think the king's mother is called the great she-elephant.
Yes.
Then Drovokazi.
Yes.
She's there. The great she-elephant.
Yes.
Her role is not to be underestimated, by the way, in determining even who becomes king. Yes, and that's why she's part of the structure of that government. Right. She-elephant.
Right.
Yes.
All right.
They share, the people of Eswatini share very many similarities with the Zulu kingdom, or should I call it the Zulu nation. Okay. The proverb, a person born to be a flower pot will not go beyond the porch.
A person born to be
a flower
pot will not go beyond the porch. Prof, what's your interpretation of this one?
Wow, that's a hard one. But it seems to suggest that there are certain roles that people may be predestined for, and they're unlikely to go beyond that point. Although I'm not completely sure. Sometimes you can overcome your restriction to the porch.
Yes.
And grow out and grow in the garden.
Yes. You... In my mind, really, this proverb talks of conditioning. Because, and you say, you are predestined to be something, and you can say, who says?
Yeah.
Who says I cannot be a wallflower? Why is someone insisting that I must remain in a pot? So, Yes.
It's not a flower, it's a pot, though. A person born to be a flower pot.
Yes.
Not flower in a pot.
Oh, no. I'm extending the meaning. Yes.
You will not become a dog if you're born as a flower pot. Okay? Or a wall.
You will not become a cooking pot.
You will not become a cooking pot.
You'll remain a flower
pot. Okay. So, Prof, research. Where does research begin?
Okay. Thank you. So, as you know, you have hosted quite a number of scientists.
Yeah.
I always like first reminding everybody, the viewers and listeners, that when we talk about health research, we are not just talking about medical research. And this will come out as I'm discussing different ways of how you develop research, how you conduct it, how you report it, and other aspects of research. So it's always important to remind people. So it's not just a medical doctor in a laboratory. Here we are talking of social research into social determinants of health. We are talking about systems determinants of health. We are talking about environmental determinants of health. But essentially, research always starts by identifying a problem. And you identify a problem in a number of ways. It can be anecdotal. You know, people start saying, hey, my auntie has had this issue. Oh, my uncle has had this issue. Or it can be from just observation. And again, I'll use medical, diseases as an example. Doctors start noticing, we are seeing people with a particular type of syndrome or symptoms. And that is exactly what happened with COVID. They realized people were coming with pneumonia that was not typical to the pneumonia that they had been seeing. So you start wondering what is going on here. So here's an example of where you're researching into a disease. So then you will start now thinking, I think there is something going on that is not the usual disease. And the question then you'll ask is, are we seeing an emergence of a new disease? I'm using emergence of a new disease as an example. And so now you start documenting carefully and looking at the trends. Are you seeing an increase? Was it a one-off? Was it a spike? Was it just an individual? You also start trying to work out which area the people are coming from, what are the characteristics of the people who seem to be coming with that challenge. Are they young people? Are they old people? Are they female, male? Is there something about their body type? And these sort of things. So this is often the first step and is what in health science we call epidemiology, coming from the word epidemic in quote, but is understanding the disease, where is it, who is it affecting, and sort of what are the numbers, and even the trends. Are we seeing an increase, or is it a one-off event? Having identified those sort of questions, then you go to the next step, and you start asking why. What is it about, if you find that it's actually prevalent, say, among young people or among old people or people with particular characteristics, you then become interested in why is it that those people are more vulnerable. And for you to understand that, the questions then you're asking is, what is it about their makeup? In other words, their biology. And this is now why you're starting to go into the lab. What is it also about that particular parasite? And again, for parasite, I use that term loosely to cover viruses, bacteria, worms, all those I'm using in general. And you also want to understand, you may first even want to understand what is that parasite, because you may not even know it. So you may have to identify it, which is, I think, luckily, and in a very unlucky manner, COVID have helped people understand a bit of how these activities occur. And so there you're doing what you call biomedical research, because there you're focusing on the biology of the person, i.e. the host, the parasite, and also you're looking at what are the channels by which transmission is occurring. So you're asking, is it insects? Is it through contaminated water? Is it through people coughing at each other and sneezing? Is it through handshake? Is it through sexual contact? So you're also trying to understand that process. And again, also now trying to understand what is the impact of this infection in the body. Which parts of the body is it affecting? So is it the lungs? Is it the gut? And all the different systems that we have.
Okay.
So once you start understanding that, it allows you first to understand the impact of how the infection is spreading, but also how it's relating with the body. Because then you can start pinpointing what is it disrupting in your body. Is it disrupting a certain metabolic? When I say metabolic, your body does a lot of things inside, yeah? That's how you live. The process of living is a combination of so many chemical activities going on in your body at any one time. So you're looking at which chemical process is being impacted by this infection. So when you have that understanding, then you can start saying, where do I intervene? So let me use an analogy that people understand. You hear noise in the car.
Yeah.
And you know, if you take it to a mechanic, they'll start thinking, that noise. First, they might even just do informed guess. They may say, that sounds very much like it's coming from the engine area.
You're in a borrow joint.
And it's a kobishoba. I'm a crankshaft. So they may not be right, but at least because they are experienced, they have a starting. It's not completely wild guess. Although sometimes we could be completely lost. Like, we've never had that noise. We'll have to lift the car to weke kwa shimo tuinue juu. We look underneath. We start trying to identify. But as you home in, for example, they may say, okay, you crank it up. When you turn on the engine, it's got very low power. So it may be the air intake, or it may be the fuel. By the way, sometimes you'll take your car when you first start owning a car as a young man. The car stops, and then you call the mechanic, and the guy comes, he checks around, and says, umeka mafuta?
And that's it.
Those you first buy an old car. The speedometer the fuel gauge doesn't show. Yeah. It's permanently on full, whether the car is empty or not. So anyway,
it's a process of elimination.
It's a process of elimination, and also a process of forming what you call a hypothesis, where a hypothesis is not a complete wild guess, because you're using all the different information that we already know about the human body and about parasites to kind of zero in. And once you've zeroed in at that point, then you can start asking. And here we are talking in some instances years, in some instances very quickly we are able to identify. And then at that point you can now start asking, how can we disrupt the parasites? At what stage can we disrupt the infection? Is it at the channel where you get infected? For example, if it is insect-borne diseases, is it killing the mosquitoes? How can we eliminate the mosquitoes? If it is through contact, if you remember, when we all had to wear face masks because for airborne, is it water? Provision of clean water? So there are all these factors that you are looking at. Yeah.
How do you then determine which is the best channel of disruption? How do you then say, okay, well, in this case, maybe we should tell folks to just wash their hands? Or should we tell folks to wear a mask? Or should we say, don't breathe next to each other, or don't breathe at all? How do you say... How do you say this is the best one to do based on that research?
Okay. Then? So there are a number of ways you come up with what is the best thing to do. In some cases, the disease will resemble other diseases. So, for example, if it's an airborne disease, a pneumonia, even if it's a new type of pneumonia, we already know how to stop infection by covering, by preventing cough droplets. So it may be that you don't need to reinvent a new intervention because already there are interventions for diseases of similar type. But in some cases you don't. And this is where now you have to start looking at... So let me use a treatment, for example, as an intervention. So again, you may find that although that disease is different from those that already existed, it's similar enough that it may be treated by already existing. So, for example, bacterial infections, they are often treated with antibiotics. Because bacteria belong to similar families, you may get a new disease with a new member of the same family, meaning that you can still use the antibiotics that you've been using against that family in general. However, there are times when we don't even have those treatments. So there what happens is that having tried to understand the biology, so now understanding your enemy, in the same way, if you had any enemy, you'd have to work out what are their ways, how do they invade our country, what type of arsenal are they using, what uniforms are they wearing so that we can recognize them. And then, again, now you use our understanding of biology to say, maybe this compound here can kill these parasites.
Yeah.
But at that point, you still don't have a surety that it will work.
Yeah.
And in fact, maybe every 100 or more compounds or chemicals that scientists often start with, you may end up with only one. Or two working.
Yeah.
Now, and feel free to interrupt me as I flow along.
Yeah.
Now, we have made, again, educated guess. And I know people here, scientists guess. Well, at some point we are starting with, that's why I'm saying it's educated, because it's informed by other, the knowledge we already have about things. That's what we call a hypothesis in more technical term.
Yeah.
In less technical term, it means we are anticipating or hoping based on the knowledge we have. So you then start testing those compounds. First, you test them. We don't say, I think this will work, and you walk up to Muga, you're coughing, That is completely unethical. There are ways we test. We test in the lab, for example. We can take human cells. First, we can take...
From a living human being?
Yeah. Okay. Your red cells, your white blood cells, all these cells which you can get from the blood. We can also grow those parasites in the laboratory. So first you normally grow them outside the human body, and you hit them with this, your experimental drug, let's call it that.
Yeah.
And you see whether it will kill them. Now, it may kill those parasites, so you think you're in luck. But actually you're not yet in luck, because there are a lot of things that can kill parasites outside the body. But remember, you don't know whether that thing that is killing the parasite would also kill the human being.
Yeah.
The most efficient way to kill the parasite would be to kill the host and the parasite. But it would be very, very unethical.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd want that. So basically, you have now at least shown in the laboratory this chemical that we guessed, educated ways, that it might kill the parasite, has worked in the lab. So the next step often has been to then go to what we call the animal stage for testing. So you're taking mice, and this is where the traditional guinea pig term came from, that you could test in guinea pig. It doesn't just have to be guinea pigs or mice. It depends on whether that disease can infect particular animals. So it may be rat, it may be mice, it may be even monkeys. So you infect them deliberately, and then you treat them with that compound. At the same time, you're starting to also check how toxic, how poisonous, how dangerous this compound is. Because if it's knocking out mice in certain quantities, you can scale up by human being and say, well, this one, even though it looks like it's good, we can't put it in humans. But if you pass the animal, what you call animal model, that stage, then that's when you start what are called human clinical trials. And
if you notice that it did not kill the animals.
No, so there are two things you're checking there. You're checking whether it will cure the animal.
Okay.
Remember, you've infected the animal.
Yep.
But you're also checking the amount that will kill the mice. So we test, we say...
So you have to go all the way until the thing dies?
Well, you have increasing doses.
Right.
So there's a group that may get 10 units, whatever the unit may be, 20 units, that unit, 40 units. You keep... So there are groups that will get increasing amounts. And what then you're doing there is we call it toxicity testing. So you will say, at 40 units, 50% of the mice died. So they didn't die from the disease, they died from
the medication.
The medication. And so you have to now be aware, if you're going to go into humans, you even for your first test, you will be using the lowest amounts. And at this point, when the first time you go into humans, you're not testing whether it cures. The first thing you always test is safety. Is it safe? So you take, normally it's healthy male young adults. We don't start with women because obviously of subsequent risk in pregnancy and childbirth. So it's normally healthy young men. Often in Europe they do it with university students. And I want to take a slight break here because I want to discuss the issue of the ethics of now testing in humans.
What are the testing in humans? The steps in health research, that is what Professor Sam Kinyanjui, head of training at the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust program in Kenya, is taking us through. Okay, so we are at that stage where you have identified, so this is the pathogen, it's killing, whatever parasite it's killing, it's affecting or infecting
people.
And then you take it to
animal. You test.
You start observing what is happening.
Experimental compound
to the animal.
Yeah.
And the question that just comes in out of this break is, so where's the ethics? Why do you want to do this to animals?
Good.
And why not humans first? Okay. Yeah. Professor Sam Kinyanjui, he's training us because he's the head of training at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust program on the steps in health research. So we've done those ones, identified a problem, there's like a disease, you've noticed there's a disease that's spreading, and you've gone to the lab, you've tried some chemical things here and there to see if those things can help. And then you've gone to a fully healthy monkey or rat or mouse or guinea pig, and you've infected it with that disease. And then this chemical of yours, you try now to inject it to see whether it's going to heal it. But you continue injecting to see at what point the thing will start turning blue. That's unethical.
So I think, first, let me say this. The question you've asked is very legitimate. And there has been a lot of safeguard put around the ethics of animal testing. We accept that to an extent it's inevitable to go through that step in most cases because you wouldn't want to go straight to human beings. In the same sense, and some people may disagree, but we do use animals for food. But in the same way, if you look at the way
we don't want to eat humans.
Well, kind of.
All right.
But but even if we look at the way now animals are slaughtered, though we accept that people will eat animal, you can't torture them and just slaughter them haphazardly. So even for animal work, there are very clear rules around how they will be done, what is considered torture and what is considered necessary research procedures. I'm not saying they wouldn't necessarily be painful to the animal, but what you consider necessary. And indeed, for you to be able to do animal work, it's actually harder to get an ethical approval. You have to prove even harder why you're doing that than sometimes even with human research. And also what has happened is, for example, the animals, the higher primates now, chimpanzees and all that, where we think there's a greater sense of suffering, and where now it's much, much, much harder to do any research using them. So you tend to use lower and lower animals.
That you have to ask somebody before you start.
And that is what I was about to come to, that whole concept of ethics of clinical trials, whether it's in animals or in human beings. So if I think that this compound will work, I don't walk up to people and start injecting them. And there's a reason for this. We have had bad history. I mean, some of you may be familiar with the work that German Nazi used to do on their prisoners of war, on the Jews who they captured, and they would do very nasty experiments. For example, they would leave you outside to see how long a human takes to freeze to death, or deprive you of oxygen and see how long you can live, or inject
or heat your body to see how heat is necessary to kill you.
Exactly.
Yes.
So over time, in fact, after the Second World War, the number of if you like, declarations and agreements and guidelines were developed to govern health research. The first was the Nuremberg Code, which came after all the trials of these Nazi doctors who had done really nasty things. Then we are familiar with, for example, in the US, there have been nasty stories of where blacks were subjected to infections, even though there were denied treatment, just to observe how that infection progresses. These were the Tuskegee syphilis cases.
Yes.
And so those led to Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, and then the Belmont Report. And basically, just to really briefly summarize what they talk about, is that for clinical trials, there's something, first is you have to have respect for the person who is being asked to participate.
In the trial,
In a trial. So this respect is autonomy. And for those people who don't have autonomy, for example, children, there has to be another person, not the researcher themselves, who is mandated to give permission on their behalf, because they are sent.
Yes.
And that is obtained by what we call consent, informed consent. In other words, you are told what is going to happen, you're told the risks, you're told the benefits, you're told your rights, you're told if you can get out of it if you want, and so on and so forth. The second is a question of beneficence. So it's a question of doing no harm. So you shouldn't just do tests where you'll harm people. You minimize harm. You may not reduce adverse effect to zero, but you aim as much as possible. You should not knowingly harm people for the sake of research. And the third one is justice, which is essentially that you shouldn't select people to participate in research because they're vulnerable, like going to a prison or going to a poor place, because you kind of know if you also give them a bit of inducement, they'll participate. And also, you shouldn't really do tests for people who are not going to benefit. So, for example, coming to Africa to test a drug for European disease.
Which doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. But people tend to think of only that direction. But even the reverse, going to test malaria drugs in a European child who is very unlikely to encounter malaria is equally unjust for them. So
they may visit Africa.
But in general, that's not their biggest risk. But you get the gist. So you're also ensuring that the people where you're testing will benefit should this work. It's not always assured it will work. Then there are other aspects, and the key one is that research has to be reviewed by an independent committee, what we call an ethics review committee. And this is not just scientists. These normally will have lay people, it will have leaders, it will have different people represented. In Kenya, just for the listeners, all the ethics review committees at different institutions are accredited by NACOSTI, the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation. And so they are the ones that give those committees the right to then review the proposal, the work you're you would like to do. And they will look at, is the science right? Because bad science is unethical. Like, I can't just come and say, I think eating soy will cure you, and it's unethical because I'm doing bad science. But they also look at how are the rights of the participants protected. They will ensure that you'll follow the right protocols. And in many cases, especially for clinical trials, you'll also have other regulatory bodies that will step in. So, for example, if it is a trial involving injecting either an experimental drug or vaccine, in Kenya we have the Poison and Pharmacy Board that will also be involved. In the US they have FDA and others. So a researcher doesn't make their own, doesn't come up with their own research and just go off and do it.
So there'll be oversights.
There are oversights.
Other areas.
Yeah.
Is there compensation should this experiment go wrong?
So, yes. So depends more so with the clinical trials that involve injecting what we call an invasive process, where you're even injecting a new compound or vaccine into the person. Yeah, there will be insurance to cater for compensation by whoever is a sponsor of the trial. But that said, for any given experimental, even for the normal drugs, even post-experimental, and I was going now to the next step where there will, as I say, the first thing we're looking at is what are the risks and what are the adverse effects associated with this new drug or compound. At that point, you're not even looking whether it cures or not.
Or not.
You're simply saying, can we use it? Can we inject a human being
with this? Can I ask? So during a trial, the individual. What happens if, whether you're injecting with said disease or injecting with said medication, what happens if something does go wrong?
So what happens is that, first, remember, there will be, as we said, there will be an insurance and compensation for the person. You do not hold the scientists culpable in a criminal sense, in the sense that when you're doing a trial, unless you can demonstrate that they knew this is going to happen and they just were being negligent, and because remember, this in many cases you are now testing for the first time in human, and that is also why even there you have what we call dose escalation. You start with very small amounts and you keep pushing, and then you stop at where you think you can treat the disease, but you still haven't seen any toxic effects. So the aim is to try and get drugs that have there's some drugs that are very good, but they have a very, very small amount before they become toxic. So you don't want to use that drug, although in terms of curing, it can cure, because that's the next step. Once you've shown it's safe, at least now you see whether it can be used to treat. And the way we do that is, if there's already an existing drug, you compare it with the existing drug, and you monitor, and you are always ready that if you think this is not working, you revert to the existing drug. That's why you're comparing in some cases, there is no drug at all. So there you're comparing that drug with what you call placebo. Like, the easiest way to say is, imagine you're being injected with the main drug, the experimental drug, or even with
what?
It's normal saline, essentially. In most cases, it's not considered ethical if there is an alternative option. So you compare the option, the new with the option. But in some cases, there simply isn't an existing drug at that point. So you are looking there to see whether now you get cure. But remember, even here, it's a very small group of people who are in specialized facilities, because you are also still looking at toxicity. Remember, you started with healthy people. You don't know how it is going to impact on someone who is unhealthy. And here the numbers are still in the tens. You then move on, if you see that, to again now with the dose which you felt was the optimum, to hundreds.
A bigger number.
Now to hundreds of people. Then
who are also still healthy.
No, now these are people who are sick, but now you are expanding the numbers. Because what happens is that all drugs will have one adverse effect or another. And you may not see that effect when you have a small number of people. It's the same thing, if you walked out and you wanted to see someone wearing red, if you only looked at 3 people, you almost certainly won't see red. Or purple. Let's use purple because it's rare. But you can be sure as you walk and the numbers increase, you will eventually meet somebody wearing a pink and purple shirt together. It may take you walking across half of Nairobi to someone with a combination of a purple trouser, but eventually and it's the same thing. There are some adverse effects you cannot see until you've seen a very large number. So then you escalate again to an even larger number, and you are now looking mainly at seeing what are the adverse effects so that they can be documented. Now, to also
Prof, these adverse effects, you're looking for them within a very short time.
Well, depends on how quickly you're able to recruit. Some diseases are rare. So it means for you to end up with 1,000 people will take. And maybe here is where I can explain why people wondered how quickly COVID was tested and all this. Because we had millions of cases. So literally, in a day, you could run a trial.
Many people.
And also, it affected a large cross-section of humanity.
Yes. So you could do a lot of this.
So you could do all the races and all.
Yes.
You could collapse a lot of these
But
aspects.
the issue then of the time comes in.
Well,
so we were testing these vaccines, but over a very short period of time. And you know what has been there in the public domain. We don't know the long-term effects.
No. So the reason why in many cases the drugs take long is not because time in itself is essential. It takes long because in many cases getting all the cases is. So it's not that as a researcher we want to test as quickly as possible. If I can get 1,000 cases in 3 days, I'm good. So it's not that I want to test over, So what
many years.
Many years. So what happens, the way you address the issue you've raised, and this happens with all drugs and vaccines and interventions, is that even after now it has been approved by the right regulatory and say this is good, FDA, whether in Kenya, Poison Pharmacy Board or whoever it is that is approving, we have a post-rollout or post-marketing survey. Because remember now, even at the best, you still have tested maybe 1 million people or so. But now you're selling it to 50 million people. So now you're likely to also see even more newer adverse effects that you didn't know existed because you could only see it within a certain number. Now, you still keep tracking. And what happens if you notice with many drugs, if you take out the inside inscript that has the different, it says contraindicated for X, contraindicated for Y. These are things that are added as new information comes in. You realize, it's working very well, but there seem to be a group of people when they are prescribed this drug seem to have a particular problem. Again, remember the way we started? You're back to the first question. What is it about these people? Is it their age? Is it that they are people who take Tusker, mbilimbili kama kawaida? Is it when they take coffee? Is it people who also happen to have diabetes? So again, you do exactly the same research we've said. You track down, you pinpoint, then you actually come down and say, actually, what it appears is that this seems to exacerbate these side effects, or it seems to make this disease condition worse. So then you get an additional documentation saying, do not take alcohol when you're, or do not drink milk with this, or do not do X, or if you have diabetes, don't prescribe this drug. So this continuous tracking of all these effects, and in some cases, drugs do get recalled if.
So they notice that there's something happening to it.
Yes. So there's another thing I need to emphasize here. Treatment is always a risk versus benefit balance.
Yes.
So the more lethal the disease, the more we are likely to accept slightly more poisonous drugs relative to a less lethal disease. That's why you find like treatment for cancers are quite toxic. They are very nasty. But
the
benefit outweighs the risk, because in some, and again, just so that I'm very clear, there are many cancers that are treatable. There are cancers that are harder to treat than others. There are cancers that will almost inevitably hit you off if they were not treated very quickly. So you have really toxic drugs and in addition to looking for new drugs, what we do in research, we are also constantly looking for less toxic drug for each of the diseases. So even for cancers, even where there is treatment, we are constantly looking to see whether we can get equally or even better drugs that are less toxic.
In fact, that's the reason why you'll find drugs are prescribed, and you're told it has to be prescribed,
Yes.
and you have to be given directions as to how exactly you must use it.
Precisely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to ask about some of the effects then after the drug has you come off the drug and it's working.
Yeah.
Some of the effects, because if you maybe it's rudimentary thinking, but then would the research not then allow one to reduce on the effects of this particular drug, or is it something that you just can't help because of physiology?
No, actually, you're right. So what happens is, you may say, oh, for people with diabetes, if you're also going to take this drug, now you'll be taking half the amount.
Yes.
Or because we realize by the time you're taking a bit more, so of course we still have to keep it within the level where it treats you.
Yes.
But we work out, actually here, you may be able to reduce and still get the same cure without the same effect.
Yeah.
Or you maybe say, actually for children, what's happening is maybe this dose, although we did check, is still a bit, it has an increased risk of that effect, and we might be able to reduce it and still get the same impact. Let me give you an example. Okay, this wasn't so much adverse effect, it was the effect itself. So it wasn't like a negative. So yellow fever vaccine. And this is work that we did at KEMRI-Wellcome. There has been a shortage of yellow fever vaccines. There's a very small stock relative to the demand because it hasn't been produced regularly. But then we hypothesized, remember, that educated guess, actually, what if you reduced the dosage? Would you still get the same level of protection?
Yeah.
And actually, been able to show you can reduce the dosage to a fifth.
What?
And still get the same protection. So, in other words, through our research,
One dose can now treat
we
five.
have increased the stock of yellow fever vaccines in the world by fivefold, just without any more manufacturing. So that is a research where you go back and question the original. It's not that they were wrong, because remember, you have a range. So once you find a range that works, you say, we are good, we are good to go. Occasionally, you'll come back and go, can we see whether lowering this range will have the same impact? And because sometimes what happens is that there are some prescriptions that were based on what you call expert opinion. The professor in medicine felt it really would be.
It would be best if you did.
If you also added this, or you did, or you had 3 doses. So we also do what are called pragmatic clinical trials. What are called practical. Pragmatic is so it's going back to the dosages and saying the evidence that says you have to take 3 times a day. What if you actually took 2 times a day? Because now, with new understanding of the disease and new understanding of this drug over the last 10 years, we have worked out actually probably we are getting excessive of what we need. We can half the amount and still. So by then you can't also still wake up and say, now that we have done that, we are just going to have it. You still have to go through a clinical trial, because remember, you're risking giving people an underdose.
Yeah.
So someone has to look at it and say, there is a logical reason to think that this is a good
So it's just as
trial.
expensive. So the farmer could have done this, and the pharmaceutical company could have done the trials and seen, well, we could do it with 50%, but let's just do the whole 100% so that we sell more.
So what happens is that farmer does not wake up, contrary to what a lot of people think. Yeah. And in any industry, let me just say this, because some people, but they have done this. There is misbehavior.
Yes.
But farmer still is regulated by independent public bodies. So when they generate their data, it still has to be scrutinized and reviewed by independent public bodies. That's why I keep using FDA, the American equivalent, or Pharmacy and Poisons Board, and other regulatory bodies that we review. So pharma itself doesn't wake up, test, work, and say, hey, this worked, and go into the market and sell.
There has to be someone else.
Yeah.
Well, some very good dedication that we've gotten this morning. Thank you very much, Prof. Come
Karibu
again.
sana.
So when you get that letter, Now it'll be telling you how regularly you'll be coming.
No. The main issue is
The bottom line.
no Woolworth. You're paying. You're paying.
Pinned him on the woolies.
Woolworths,
You're paying for.
go
the-
take 3. Eric pays for one. Okay?
Yeah?
That is- Eric and Woolworths have this Black Friday deals. Between
essentially,
today,
you're only paying
26th.
for 2.
I pay for 2. Eric pays for 1.
Eric pays for 1.
Where it's Woolworth paying.
So Woolworths and Mimi, same thing. It's 9 a.m. Time for the
what a
news.
pleasure.
Professor Sam Kinyanjui is the head of training at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust program in Kenya.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.